Offer this gata, lighting this candle in honor of all of our ancestors, all of our teachers, all of our more than human kin who offer wisdom to us in this conversation. Lighting this candle, offering light to countless Buddhas. The peace and joy we feel brighten the face of the earth. So this conversation came from conversations starting over a year ago with Sangha friends who had a shared desire for there to be more discussion and sharing of our direct experience of how we're bringing mindfulness to our practice of physical intimacy and true love. So we know that in our Plum Village tradition, there are wonderful teachings and trainings on how to sit and walk and eat joyfully and mindfully. And this feels like an area where lay practitioners can share with one another about our practice of physical intimacy and true love in such a way that can hopefully normalize our practices of physical intimacy, remove stigma and shame, and also help us prevent further harm and suffering that is often found in these topics, whether through repression or through abuse. We also know that the four of us as queer identified practitioners have various experiences from our culture and spiritual upbringing where there can be religious trauma around our sexuality and our gender identity. And so we wanted to have a space to speak about those in relationship to our mindfulness practice as well. So with that framing, the four of us have been meeting and practicing these conversations for several months. And I'd like to see if my fellow conversants have anything they'd like to add in this introduction before we really introduce ourselves.
Yes, I can bow in. My name's Dana. I use she and they pronouns. Can y'all hear me? Yeah, cool. Yeah, I guess the only thing that I wanted to add, thank you for that introduction and the framing, is that, my hope is that we can share our experiences with the knowledge that none of us are experts by any means. We've been practicing for a while, but the hope really is just to share what we've learned and ways that we've practiced in order to hopefully kind of plant some seeds for any listeners and maybe spark some conversations. Yeah, further down the road. This is sort of like just a beginning to kind of, we don't really know where it's going to go, but yeah, that's the hope. So.
Dear friends, this is Matt bowing in. Thank you, Linz, for the invitation. Um, there is one thing that comes up for me is I would like to invite people to come in with curiosity, with open heart. So if there's something that doesn't flow with you, just be with that and have a perhaps a curiosity of why that is coming up. And if you need to walk, if you need to get up and shake, please do so. There's invitation there. Thank you.
This is Tofu buying in. Just gratitude for you all showing up for a thing that we're like, hey, we're going to do a thing. And you all showed up to go on an adventure with us. And though we all have an idea of what we're doing here, we're also the unfolding of what this will be. Thank you. This is Tofu buying out.
Thank you, dear friends. So I'll now invite us to just introduce ourselves a little bit more. And I'm putting in the chat a series of questions And you can speak to any of these that feel resonant, including how you came to the Plum Village practice or other spiritual practices that nurture you, the social identities that feel relevant to you to share related to sacred sexuality. That might include race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, class, or your lived experiences, and your hopes for the conversation, or what resonated with you to join this conversation about bringing mindfulness to our practice of sexuality and intimacy. And anyone can bow in to start.
I can be brave here. Yeah. My name is Dana. I use she and they pronouns. Yeah, so I came to well, I guess I came to the Plum Village practice through a series of events, starting with a Buddhist thought class in undergrad. And I was suffering very much during that time. And I was just so happy to have found some meditation practices that could help me while I was like, having panic attacks. And I would sort of use meditation as a mindfulness tool to like calm down. And then I kind of just used it here and there for many years until after grad school, when I moved back from Orlando, Florida to Tampa, Florida. I worked there for a couple of years and then started my own private practice in mental health counseling for LGBTQ folks, non-monogamous folks, folks who practice alternative lifestyles, swinging, BDSM. So that whole group of sometimes outcasts. And I kind of felt like I really needed to be more grounded as a therapist. So I found the Florida Community of Mindfulness and just really found a lot of resonance with a teacher that was there who happened to be ordained in the Plum Village tradition, named Fred Epsteiner. And he'd also worked with multiple other teachers, so he was kind of pan-Buddhist. Yeah, I got really lucky in getting to work with him for about 3 years, very closely with a small group. And then after that program was done, I moved to Colorado and helped restart the Wake Up Sangha here in Denver. Which I guess brings us to, identities. Let's see, I identify as non-binary, identify as queer, I identify as also a woman, also born into sort of a working class / middle class family. My dad is white, sort of Southern, grew up kind of all of our family grew up in Florida. So there's that sort of country element. And then my mother is Chinese, first generation. So I'm second generation Chinese American. I have an able body, and yeah, that sounds about good enough for that. Yeah, and I just wanted to be part of this conversation because I feel like it doesn't happen enough in spiritual spaces. I feel like it kind of gets brushed over. It's like, and take care of your sexual energy. And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Like, what? So I'm hoping that we can sort of share our own experiences and normalize it, in particular queer experiences, which can be really diverse and often aren't talked about or represented. So I'm hoping that we can offer something really unique here as well, that might resonate with folks who are listening. So this is Dana bowing out.
I can go next. So this is Tofu bowing in. I always say Adam and Tofu, both names make me happy. So how I came to this practice is initially it was Matt and I were on a road trip many years ago now, And we got a book by Thich Nhat Hanh that both resonated with us. But it would be years later, my mentor, Jana Gabar, there is a photo of her, brought me really into this practice and got me to go to Deer Park. I was resistant for some reason, but then fell in love with the practice. So social identities, I'm very European or white. I'm queer, identify as a male. I grew up in a middle-class environment. Growing up, when I was going through like elementary, middle, and high school, they identified me with a learning disability. Now that would more be identified as learning different. And then my hopes for this conversation can span other conversations in this practice, that sex doesn't have to be taboo, because unfortunately in almost all religious practices, it becomes almost a dirty word, or you don't talk about that, or if you engage in a sexual act, somehow something's wrong. And I want people to feel safe first having this conversation, because having it, I actually think, creates safety, and then kind of expand on that. So yeah, that's what I have in this moment. So this is tofu banging.
Dear beloved Thai, dear beloved community, this is Matt, Plum Village bowing in. My pronouns are he, him. I see myself as a gay man, but I'm trying to lean towards the identity of being queer, because I think that is more expansive than just being a gay cis male person. I was born in Thailand, so I grew up in a very Buddhist culture and tradition. And in Thailand, it's mostly Theravada tradition. So I am very familiar with that. And I came to the States when I was around 10-ish. So my adolescent years is basically in the 90s in the US. And when I first came here, I was very intrigued by the concept of God, which is a very one divine male person. So I kind of threw myself into Christianity during my teenage years, which very difficult for me, because then I realized that I was different, especially with my sexual orientation. And because the church that I went to, it's a evangelical church, and so I have a very difficult time trying to love myself for who I am when my community, my spiritual community, is telling me different. So I went through a lot of self-hatred, a lot of depression, and then one of the class that I took in college is one of the philosophy class, and it was Introduction to Religion. And in that course, a professor, one of the books that we read is The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. And that book, I think, kind of basically saved my life from from that kind of environment. And it also gave me a very tap on the shoulder to let me know that, hey, why don't you try going back to your root and see how that can unfold. But because of, the organized religion, I have a very bad taste from it. So it took me a lot to really unlearning to love spirituality again, to love the concept of the spiritual realm, and so the more I'm going back to my root and study Buddhism, the more it's making more sense to me, and also making me open to love myself again for who I am, and also accept my sexual orientation. So yeah, but as Adam was saying, both of us came to Plum Village at tradition at the same, basically at the same time. But because of my bad experience, I still have that, reluctant of wanting to join an organized, tradition of whatever religion it is. I'm still having our cold feet, basically. Yeah. So I met my spouse, my husband, Adam, in 2008. And one of the things that we connect is our core belief of wanting to be spiritual, wanting to have some kind of foundation that will make us more loving, more compassionate. And when we found Plum Village tradition, it kind of, like, okay, this is making sense for us. But I'm speaking for myself, is that I don't see myself as a Buddhist. I don't see myself as a person that is belong to one type of religion. So Jaina, as Adam was mentioning, is our mentor, and one of the philosophy that she gave us is the braided way. So what that is kind of, we take the good things from each teachings and each wisdoms, and kind of braid it into our belief system, basically. Yeah. And one of the nice thing is that we got engaged at Deer Park in 2017 in one of the retreat, and we got married during our 10 years anniversary in 2018. So you can do the math of how long we have been together and married. But one of the things that we take to our heart with our relationship, and I think there's a whole bunch of different kind of relationship, and I also want to acknowledge that. But for us, is we flow better with monogamous relationship. Yeah. So I think my 5 minutes is up. I always take too long, so I'm just gonna bow out. Thank you.
Dear friends, Lynn's Vang, and can we have flowers for folks who have your video on? Can we have flowers for our courageous friends who are sharing so beautifully? I feel like we're kind of in the warm up or the foreplay part of our conversation, so you can get a sense of us, and so we can just ground with each other in this. So thank you. So yeah, for myself, again, my name is Lynn's, and I began meditating in 2016 through a very secular mindfulness-based stress reduction class, because I had grown up Southern Baptist and left the church at the age of 14. and received just a lot of shame and stigmatization from my community as a result of that. So I stayed really far away from any kind of spiritual community at that time for a couple of decades, and then gradually crept my way closer and closer to spiritual community, and had read Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron's books in college, and finally started to look up and realize there were local sanghas, there were local meditation groups in maybe 2018, 2019, and really began practicing with the Plum Village tradition starting in late 2019 and early 2020 during the pandemic. And I've now been to many retreats that I've been so fortunate to be part of at Deer Park and other practice centers. And when these questions around true love and physical intimacy and sexual energy come up, the answers I've often heard are, take care of it, use breath energy to convert that energy, or work it out through exercise. So it has mixed messages that it's something to get rid of, but also something to protect because your energy might be limited and you might leak out your life force. So those have been some of the messages I've gotten, and it feels a lot like some of the abstinence messages from Christianity. But as I've been talking with other practice friends in smaller conversations about their own practices, there's so much wisdom there. And so let's see what else. I also want to share some of my identities. I identify as white-bodied, European American, as queer and pansexual. I came out also about 8 years ago. Non-binary is a term that I don't love, but feels okay. I think gender expansive or gender joyful feel really good to me. I would say I'm not a woman. I'm not a Christian, not a Buddhist practitioner, and also holding all of those terms and identities kind of fluidly. I identify as able-bodied. I've also had experiences with mental health around anxiety and depression and some chronic illness, and identify as middle class. And so all of these identities are just so that you have a sense of where you might see yourself in our stories and sharings, and where you might have different experiences, and that the four of us are sharing directly, and yet we know this is just a tiny part of a much wider spectrum of all of our identities and our gender and sexual experiences. Yeah, I think you've heard already a little bit about my hopes for this conversation. Yeah, I hope it's a benefit. I hope it starts many, many more conversations among all of you and ripples out. I would love it if this winds up being a series of podcasts with folks of different identities, or webcasts or something like that. So we'll see what comes from this. So I'm going to bow out as Lynn's and turn to share my screen. So we've got 5 questions. We have a list of over 20 questions that are really juicy from conversations we've had with folks going back several months. And we want to ask all of you, of these 5 that you see on the screen, can you see that okay? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen with a list of questions? Looks like people are reading. So maybe you could place in the chat the number of your top 2 choices. What would you like to hear us reflect on? And again, later in the conversation, we'll give you all a chance to share your questions. Again, we're not coming at this from a place of expertise, but more from sharing from the heart, a kind of Dharma sharing of our own mindfulness practice and life experience that we hope can be of benefit. Great. So starting to see some messages of numbers people are interested in. Looks like number 2 and number 5 really resonate with folks. 2 and 3, 1 and 5. Oh gosh, okay. People are interested in all of the above. 1 and 4. All right. Keep them coming. This will be our little vote. We'll take another 20 seconds. Okay. Every question has votes, but it looks like number 1 and number 5 really stand out. So thank you for that. So maybe, dear friends, we could start with number 1, and anyone who feels ready can bow in. I'll also place it in the chat so that we have it handy. So how are you unlearning or letting go of concepts and conditioning around sex and sexuality through bringing your mindfulness practice to this aspect of your life? How do you integrate this aspect so it's not relegated to the shadows or compartmentalized away from your spiritual practice?
This is Matt bowing in. So one of the things that I was so conditioned in my thinking, in my thought is that being a spiritual person or practicing in a path of spirituality, that I can't hold being a sexual being and also a spiritual being at the same time. To me, I always feel like I have to pick either or, especially the tradition that I grew up in, and because those traditions are so focused based on the monastics and not focusing much on the lay practitioners. So there's a lot of hard time for me being able to relate to the practice, and the more I'm practicing as a lay practitioner now, and the more I'm practicing with equanimity, there's an understanding that came to me that I can be able to hold both. It's the both and. I don't have to pick one. So when I'm practicing now, with more openness and open heart, I feel like I am being able to hold and practice as a spiritual being and also a sexual being. I don't have to pick either or. And it helps me a lot it gives me a lot of ease when I practice, and also a lot of compassion towards me, towards myself, basically, and also recondition my belief and my thinking about spirituality. So that's one aspect of it. Another thing that came up for me is that we are so conditioned to romanticize about a person, a lover that will come and rescue us. Like we need a rescue to be able to have love or fulfill that need of love. And again, this practice is teaching me that I need to come back to myself first and really work with my suffering, and really touch my bodhicitta, the mind of love, in me first, to be able to have that fulfillment. I think Thai loves to talk about garden, and I think in our Sangha, in Chrysanthemum Sangha, we just had a Dharma offering on love, and the reading was about taking care of our garden, and also our mutual garden. So not only do we have just one garden, we also have a garden that we share with our lover or lovers, right? So for me, this teaching is helping me to cultivate that my garden. So then when I meet a person that I feel like, oh, okay, there's an a connection there. I don't have to feel like this person is coming to rescue me, or I'm not coming from a place of lack. Instead of a place of lack, I want to share what I have in my garden to basically my lover, right? Instead of, oh, I need that person to come and fulfill my will, or the glass that is empty. I think love for me is about sharing our, you know, the zucchini that grew in my garden, or the tomatoes that, grew in my garden. And I think that is a better idea for sharing a romantic relationship, which I didn't learn from my society. I didn't learn from my culture. I didn't see that in movies or TVs, or the thing that I read, that it quote unquote romantic, because it's always about, oh, this person will come into your life and fulfill that lack, right? And I think that when we get tangled in suffering, because if a person is yearning for something that they are lacking, and also the other person or persons coming from the place of lacking, there's gonna be a whole bunch of trouble there. So so for me, that is why this practice is helping me a lot, which is there's a Buddhist term of aimlessness, and I love that. Is that I am enough. I am already enough in this moment, and how can I bring that into my romantic relationship, when I see one, or when I'm practicing one. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
This is Tofu bowing in. I definitely went through a period of time, for whatever reason, engaging in sexual activity with a same-sex partner. I had shame, and I had I even when it was coming up, I'm like, what the hell is this? Where is this coming from? And I've definitely worked with going through my own concept of toxic masculinity that I've had to work through in my life. Looking back, I had clearly very accepting parents. I love to play with Barbies and action figures, and they put them both in front of me and were like, okay, I've never asked my parents, like, what did you think was going on here? And they would just flow with that. And I know for me, even now, there's times where I have to catch a thought of like, well, what is masculinity? And then, I have to remind myself, well, we all have the masculinity and the femininity. And so I feel like I'm still in the process of trying to deprogram something that carried from somewhere into this mind. One of the things that I do is work with queer youth. And I always want to just hold space and be encouraging as they're exploring, or they're talking about a thing. At this place we're at in the bathroom, there's like condoms and lube that they can just help. It's just there. We always give the tour and tell people, hey, these things are there. And for me, I believe sex in and of itself can be a deeply spiritual, profound thing. And allowing people to explore, to discover who they are and what they like. Because it's not, I don't think it's just a simple like, I don't know, you're born, boom, there it is. I know I've grown, I've known many people who've grown who, in just who they are and what they're attracted to. And I think in and of itself, that can be a deeply spiritual journey to explore that and lean into that and to flow with that. I have no idea if I'm making sense. It's been a long day. So it's a thing. So I will, this is tofu bowing out.
Dana bowing in. Unlearning concepts and letting go of conditioning. Yeah, so for context, I was lucky enough to not really be raised strongly in any particular religious tradition. We like went to church sometimes, a Christian, like Episcopal church, but then once we realized that they didn't like queer people, I was like, I gotta go. Bye. And it was so I maybe like around high school and early college sort of moved away from that. But I my connection with that faith luckily didn't embed a lot of like shame around or conditioning around sex. So I've been lucky enough to feel pretty comfortable in my body and pretty comfortable with my sexuality for as long as I've been a sexual being, which is like, I don't know, mid-teens. And then other context is that I practiced polyamory probably for about 10-ish years. So was monogamous and married, and then was polyamorous for many of those years, got divorced, was still polyamorous, and then recently actually shifted back into monogamy. But I kind of see, ways that I want to engage in relationships as fluid, like they're based on what is present in my life at that time. So that context is for, I was trying to think about like, how do I bring this to my spiritual life and not compartmentalize? And I was remembering when I first went to the practice center in Tampa, I remember being part of the wake up group. And, at that time I had my therapy practice, I'm like spending all day talking with people about their relationships and sex and BDSM and, all this stuff. And then I come to the center at night for wake up and I'm like, I allowed to talk about this in my head. I'm like, this is such a big part of my life. It's part of my professional life. And like, I guess I just didn't know if I was allowed. So I just started like testing the waters bit by bit, like, in my Dharma sharing, just like, what? And what I found, and I started in the wake up group testing the waters because it felt safer. But what I found was that many people thanked me. They were like, oh God, thank you. We can talk about this. I didn't realize how zipped up I was being, pretending like I didn't have sex or that most of what I'm ruminating about is dating. And for some reason, I don't talk about that here. So that felt really like validating. It was like, oh, good. Now we can all talk about this and hopefully learn from each other. And then there was the larger Sangha, which was all ages. And then also, my teacher, he's in his 70s. I see him as like a fatherly, grandfatherly figure. So I'm like, am I allowed to like talk about my multiple partners to this person? Am I allowed to talk about this in the larger group with many elders? Like, are they going to understand? Are they going to judge me? And so for me, it was more of a practice of seeing a story in my mind about how I was going to be judged, about how I was going to be rejected by my spiritual community, about how it wasn't okay or they were not going to understand or whatever. But then looking like, have I seen any evidence of that? And when I looked, I hadn't. So I was like, well, let me try. And so I tried. And then, just by sharing bits with my teacher, sharing bits with community members that I trusted. And then eventually just like with the whole Sangha, which was pretty large. And what I found was there was a lot of acceptance and love and a lot of like, yeah, we don't really care, do what makes you happy. are you coming to Sangha on Sunday? You know, it was just like a total non-issue. And that was so refreshing, especially like, yeah, I didn't know what to expect, and it was really pleasant. And what I found was that there were at least a couple of older members in the Sangha that came up to me privately and were like, thank you so much for sharing about your experiences with polyamory, and then shared their own experiences where they had experimenting with their spouse and, lovers or whatever, and they had felt alone. And so it just felt like, again, it circles back to why we're having this conversation. And I'm deeply grateful to be practicing in a tradition where this is okay to talk about, and that we're looking at how we can work with these energies and be exactly who we are in this tradition. Yeah, that's probably good enough. Thank you. Dana, bowing out.
So appreciating these shares, and also really sitting with myself. Do I make jokes about zucchini and tomatoes? Maybe not. We'll see. But for myself, a lot of the unlearning and letting go of concepts has happened in waves. I had access to some really healthy information about sex and sexuality in books that were in one of my set of parents' homes when I was growing up. So before I actually had physical intimacy with other people, I actually had a pretty, I think, open idea in my mind, but it was not supported at all by what I was seeing in the church community or my family communities. There were just very mixed messages. I also had a book when I was maybe 11 from James Dobson's Focus on the Family, where it was just very confusing about masturbation and spirituality and whether that was sinful or not. So I had this like really clear kind of dichotomy of the sexual side of myself and the spiritual side, similar to what Matt was sharing. So things that have been helpful for me are classes, books, and podcasts that are life affirming around sexuality and spirituality. I love Don Sarah's Sex Gets Real podcast, the Multi-Amory podcast, Curious Fox, and there's probably many more. And hearing people speak of their own experiences of the divine and of the sacred overlapping with bodies and sexuality has been really beautiful. Experimenting and playing, whether that's with like different clothing as I was exploring my gender identity, different names, different pronouns, not holding things so tightly has been really beautiful, and starting to introduce that to groups and spaces where it felt safe. And similarly with my body, I remember reading a number of years ago one of Ty's books where he talks about being outside in nature, falling asleep on a warm rock near a river or near water. And I remember thinking like, wow, I can't imagine ever feeling safe enough to just fall asleep by myself outside. I think I'd be afraid of other people coming up or, being attacked or something. And over time, living in the woods and spending more time in places without other human animals, I've become much more comfortable. And it started to explore like, oh, what would it mean to actually sit in my cabin by myself, maybe with the doors locked, naked in a sunbeam, and just enjoy the touch of the sun on my skin and just let that be okay. And then eventually I got to the point where I could do that by myself out in the woods and be like, oh yeah, this body, these different body parts, they're part of the natural world too. They're part of the animal world too. And so in just a very tangible, real experience, I think I'm practicing bringing the concepts and the thoughts in my mind into a more embodied experience of my body and sexuality as sacred. And I'm thinking a lot too about practices in spiritual communities like ritual hand washing or foot washing, especially offered to others, that happens in many traditions. These body parts that sometimes are very personal or have taboo around them. And the way that approach of offering loving kindness and presence, aware of our mortality, aware of the preciousness of our well-being or ill-being, can be brought into sexuality. So I had a really beautiful experience with a friend who visited me last fall, where we approached our physical intimacy from that place of real reverence and honoring, like, your body is miraculous. It's incredible what each of us has been through, that we've survived and we're here. We know this is impermanent, and we're going to offer our loving attention and presence as a kind of worship, as a kind of reverence or sacred act that really imbued the playfulness, the awkwardness, the silliness of our time, with the sense that all of these things can also be held within something much larger, this human experience. So those are a few. And I will bow out and invite the fifth question here. So, how do you approach healing from sexual trauma or abuse as a spiritual practice? I'll put that in the chat as well. And I want to say thank you again for everything that's been shared so far. Okay, Lynn's bowing in. I know I just shared, and some things are rising up here. Yeah. My body has this experience of sexual trauma. I don't know what all of it is from consciously, but I've had enough reactions and experiences that are pretty intense to know that there's stuff here to be worked with. And that includes a lot of vulnerability around emotional intimacy and safety that is often a prerequisite or goes alongside with physical intimacy in my experience. And so it does really feel like a spiritual practice to continue to lean into that vulnerability and that fear, to share my emotions with others, really to ask to be loved or to be touched, to express my desire to someone, which I did earlier today, and to hold all of those reactions with a lot of compassion, that whatever responses or whatever things are happening from other people are often not about me, but that I can really practice coming home to myself and to my authentic yes and no. With this friend I mentioned, where we were together last fall for a week, it was sometimes really hard for me to discern what was my true yes or no or desire. And so I actually stepped away a number of times, and I told my friend, like, hey, I'm going to be practicing with this. So I would go to the bathroom, or I would step outside, or I would go for a run until I could get really clear on how I was and where I was, and come back and say, okay, this is what I would like to share. This is what I would like to try with you. Are you open to that? And is that aligned with where you are? So that was beautiful and awkward and hard. Through Sister Dangyam's talks and her beautiful book, Flowers in the Dark, about healing from sexual trauma, she speaks a lot about working with ourselves as a soulmate, as our true soulmate. And I've really been practicing that deep listening and loving speech inwardly, especially around the vulnerabilities of physical intimacy and sex and sexuality, worthiness, lovability, coming out as 29 and feeling like, oh, I missed some of the times when certain queer sexual experiences might have been natural if I'd been 14 or 16 or something like that. So those insecurities. And so practicing with myself as a soulmate, I actually spoke some vows to myself and had a little ceremony, kind of impromptu, out in the woods one day when I came to a beautiful overlook and thought, oh, what a beautiful place for a wedding. And I've been in long-term relationships with cisgender men for about 10 years, from age 19 to 29, without much time in between those relationships, and wasn't sure if I, at the time, would ever be in a long-term relationship again. But I was like, okay, I can say some vows here at this beautiful overlook with the mountains as witnesses to myself. I can vow to deeply listen and honor and return to myself again and again. And I can vow to invite joy and pleasure into my body and my life, and to move away from dynamics that feel like they bring back the unwholesome seeds or mental formations. So having this reminder has actually been really helpful for me, of a ring and of those vows. I also think there's a lot there with like solo polyamory for folks who've read or practiced with that, and what it means to really hold myself as a whole, full person, relating with other whole, full people from that place. And so from that place, when I can trust that I and others can be with our difficult emotions and can engage in conversation with each other that hopefully is honest and clear, from that place, it feels like a spiritual practice as well as a relational practice. So, thank you.
This is tofu bowing in. There was a long time ago, there was a different spiritual practice I was in, and I had arrived there, and all of a sudden this thought came into my mind. I had not fully realized that I thought myself unlovable, but it was weird because I hadn't considered that a thing that was going on inside me. And I've definitely worked the practice, and yes, I am. I believe everybody is. But in terms of like healing trauma or from abuse, love, but it can be romantic love. It can be being in a community where you are loved. It can be around people that make you safe and feel loved. For me, has helped me to heal, to be aware of trauma going on inside this body, to create safety for it to come up and go, oh, this is happening in this moment. Oh, I see I'm getting triggered. What is that? What's going on here? And I know this practice has helped create that foundation for me, because I can come back to my breath and go, oh, wow, I'm having a reaction in this moment to a particular situation. What's going on? Where instead I felt like I was more raised like there'd be strong emotions and then you pretend nothing happened, which we all know is not a healthy way to deal with things going on. And slowing down and coming back. And for me, I'm sure it'll be a lifelong practice, that when something triggered, when something's happening, what's going on? How can I be with it? And I know even for me, the four of us have met and talked, and creating spaces like this, I think that's overall helpful, because it brings it out from the shadows, and that here's this shame topic, here's this thing we don't talk about, or sexuality, masturbation, any of these things, they're a healthy, like psychologists know these are all healthy things. These are normal things. And I wish religion, we could bridge that gap, that to kind of take away the shame aspect, because I think that shame only really, it gets in our way to be able to grow and to really be with these beings and to explore who we are and why we feel. This is Tofu Banyan.
This is Matt bowing in. So I'm not going to share the specific incident or incidents that happened, but this conversation actually came up with me and Adam about why do I have issues with, people touching me, and we went into a very deep conversation and really talk about the experiences of my childhood, and something came up and I was like, okay, that's interesting. So so for me, having to face that and realizing that, wow, okay, actually what happened wasn't normal. And when I have that realization, and as we all know, our body knows. It actually knows before our mind or our brain can comprehend what went on. But our body kind of carried that. And I think for me, to help myself realizing myself walking away from that is that first, as I think as Linz and Adam mentioned earlier, is that, you know, create a safe space. And first I have to do that for myself first, to be able to make that space within myself, and willing to hear myself, you know, as Ty was always say, you know, your 5-year-old child within you, and really taking care of that. So for me, trying to, you know, trying to go back and taking care of that, you know, that my younger self, and telling him that it wasn't my fault, and really, you know, love, yes, like Adam was saying, really love, really give that person a compassion and a sense of belonging. And again, you know, it's not your fault. I also find that connecting, having a deep conversation, connecting with people, and be in space that is feels safe enough for me to share my experience, you know. And that's why it's so important for me to have a space like Chrysanthemum Sangha, where there's a, you know, a queer safe space for me to able to talk about my experience as a queer person, as a queer child who didn't know that I was queer, right? And also being in a sangha or a dharma sharing space is also helping me, because I'm there to also hold space for other people, and hearing their stories is helping me to kind of relate and say to myself that, oh, I'm not alone, you know. Suffering is I'm not going through that on my own. I have a community to hold space for me. I have a community that I feel like I belong. And I think that's why spiritual community is so important. And I think queer people are yearning for spiritual space, because there are so much trauma and suffering, you know, with our identities, with our how we've the sense of belonging is so important. So for me to have this kind of space and this kind of conversation is helping me to say to myself, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this suffering, this, you know, this sea of suffering. And also this teaching, you know, Thai's teaching is also helping me to, you know, the 5 mindfulness training is, you know, realizing that there is a happy moment, coming back to the present moment. And there's also joy. Suffering is there, but there's also joy and happiness that I also can cultivate too. So for me, you know, to have that, again, you know, holding both places and being in the both places is helping me a lot. And another practice that I love to do is also inviting and invoking ancestors and also bodhisattvas to really help me when I'm feel like I am alone, or I don't have the energy, because the suffering is too much, or the trauma is coming up and it's too much for me to hold. is that I love the practice of invoking and evoking the Bodhisattva, or, even the energy of the Buddha, or different Buddhas, the awakening ones. It doesn't have to be in Buddhism or Buddhist tradition, right? There are so many awakening ones that came before us. There are so many even people who are out there that is do so much loving work and compassionate work. So I always invite them into my space and kind of like, yeah, can you hold me right now? Can you please be with me? Because I need, I need that energy. And I feel like that helps me when I feel triggered and there's a lot of trauma coming up. Especially I call, Mother Earth, the Bodhisattva Gaia. So I love laying down on the ground and just listen to the bird songs and seeing the trees, connecting with the trees, and knowing that I'm not alone. That right now, the earth is our most ancient ancestor is holding me and my suffering. I don't have to hold it alone. So that's how I practice. That's a glimpse of my practice. Yeah. Thank you.
Says Dana, bowing in. I just want to check in, Linz. Does this conversation go till 7:30 or 8 Mountain?
Until 8 tonight. Yeah.
Till 8. Okay. I was like, oh man, we're okay, we're doing good.
And in Central Mountain Time, right?
Mountain time, yeah.
Okay.
What a complex question. Yeah, I guess from my own experience, the word abuse is really tough because it implies that I have been abused and that there is an abuser, which I don't think has really been my experience. But I do know that my body has registered many experiences that I've had over my life as a sexual being as trauma. Maybe not intended, just more like not knowing. I think growing up, before there was a lot of talk around consent, I had many unskillful experiences. And many of which maybe I have caused harm too. So and I say that to kind of normalize, like, oh, I can't point to any particular like, and this was the instance in which there was trauma, but I do know that it has been a practice, especially in the last like 5 or 6 years, of learning. And again, this is where I'm like learning to integrate my spiritual practice with sexual practices and bringing those together, just like learning to, just like we do in meditation, where we like invite in all of the feelings and invite in the truth of what's happening without pushing anything away. I've been lucky enough to be with partners that I can share, like, sex won't always be like joyful and passionate and like sexy and fun. Sometimes it involves tears. Sometimes it involves stopping and breathing. Sometimes it means stopping and doing something else, like making popcorn and watching a movie. And I know for myself, sometimes when I get in a triggered space, I can almost like superimpose an imaginary past person onto the present person, which is not really what I want to be doing when I'm trying to be present with someone. Yeah, so practices that have really worked for me are number one, communication and knowing myself, knowing my history, knowing ways that my body responds, my mind responds to particular things, and being able to communicate that. And also communicating that I really don't even, I probably haven't even found all the ways that I can be triggered. I mean, just like in life. And so kind of being upfront and holding space for like, for me and for you, there we can always stop. And we can always just be with each other and breathe And that the point of sex isn't to have a wonderful orgasm, although that's like great. It's to connect with each other as we are. And I think it's been so healing to like create spaces like that where both me and the person I'm with can hold that in an embodied way. And like when something comes up, we both stop and then we both do deep looking. What's going on? And if, sometimes I can't even communicate it, and that's okay. Maybe we communicate about it later. Um, but making sex not about sex, it's not about sex. It's about connection. It's about love and understanding each other more deeply in real time. And I think that part of that is, and that kind of goes back to like the throwing out the um schemas, like the little boxes that we get, like sex is supposed to look like this, and then this, and then this, and then you're done, and it's wonderful. And it's like, well, that's not really how it works, I think, for most people. um, yeah, so the spiritual practice is really inviting in, communicating earnestly in the moment and or later if possible. And also making space for that in my partner too. Maybe my partner is triggered, and like knowing that I can hold space for that, or maybe we both get triggered at the same time, and but I think there's like a non-attachment piece that like when we're being physically intimate, it doesn't have to go to any particular place. It doesn't have to look like any particular thing. We're just loving each other, whatever that looks like, and that can be joyful even if some unexpected things come up. So I think that's where I'll stop.
Beautiful, friends. I want to invite your sharings on this second question, how you approach sex and communicating about sex through your mindfulness practice, and then perhaps open it up to questions from folks who are with us in the conversation.
This is Matt bowing in. Yeah, the first golden rule to a whatever relationship, romantic, friendship, I think communication, right, is so much, is the priority. And in this practice, the practice of loving communication and mindful speech is helping me to really, really go deep into how I communicate. Because I grew up in an environment with a single mom, you know, she doesn't have the tool, and for me to, she didn't pass on a skillful tool once it comes to communication. So I have to learn that on my own, especially with, with my spouse. When angers, when my triggers comes up, how do I handle it without basically, taking it out on my spouse? And I think it's also connecting with how I communicate, with with my sexual experience, right, with my spouse. It's also the interconnectedness of the way to communicate skillfully, and really be open about, what I like and what I dislike. I think we get to the point where we are very comfortable of telling each other about that, sharing each other about that. But it was a long way that kind of took us here, because we have to find, different. We have to play with a lot of different, basically how the tools that can communicate for the two of us that make us feel more basically safe, and also feel like we are being heard. And I think it's important to know that love and sex, to differentiate the two. I think it's also important because, you know, sex without love is just sex, right? There's no, there's no meaning to it. And when we are talking about sacred sexuality, we have to kind of connect those two together. We have to connect like what we see as love, and then what we see as sex, and kind of connect those two, kind of work it with those two aspects into one. Because love, we can love, you know, our parents, we can love our children, we can love our pets, but once it comes to romantic love, then you kind of, you get into a different field, and you have to go very, very deep into your core being, because you are connecting with, and there, when you get into that core being, there's also suffering there, and there's also traumas there. So to really communicate your trauma and your suffering. And I think for my relationship, I see sex as one of the important thing for my relationship. So then again, for the two of us, we have to make space for it. You know, without making space for it, then it will not happen. And I think it's important that we should make that kind of space for intimacy, for bonding, and also be okay if something didn't work out. Like I love what Dana just shared, you know. Well, sometimes it doesn't, you know, happen like what we expected to. Then we kind of, you know, perhaps laugh or move on to something else, and perhaps we can come back. But it's important to make space for it to happen, because I think that sex in a romantic relationship is a beautiful tool for bonding the relationship between people. Yeah, thank you.
This is Tofu buying in. One of the things that I have just weaved into with the working with queer youth is that it should be taught as part of sex education is consent as a thing. That should actually be taught so people understand even what that means, to consent or not consent. And I know for myself, and I think this was true for Matt, is we grew up in environments that didn't have good communication. And so early in our relationship, we didn't have the greatest communication because we didn't have the skill set to, you have a conflict and this is how you deal with conflict. I know I was raised to, in any situation, everyone would yell, and then the next day you pretended nothing happened. I remember even as a kid going, wait, shouldn't we talk this out? What was all that worth then? Why did we just do a thing? And we were fortunate with our mentor, Jaina Gabar, that she actually put on couples classes to talk about nonviolent communication. And it was also a whole unique experience to be one of the few queer couples among primarily non-queer people, but that communication, I think it doesn't matter how well you know a sexual partner, but communication is important. This is okay, this is not okay. This is ways you know, just how you interact with that person, I feel is so important. And again, I so wish this was taught in schools as like a basic fundamental, and like but I feel that has just, for me, in terms of that can even be broader in just terms of how I interact with people. I mean, even in terms of like, I feel like even how the four of us are communicating now, it's because we created safety among ourselves, that we were like, okay, this is safe. Yeah. And just continuing, for me, what makes communication work is to also slow down and work my practice and not get in front of my thoughts, which can go like 100 miles an hour, and and slow down. So yeah, this is tofu banging.
Okay, I'll go. That's Dana bowing in. Approach communicating about sex through mindfulness practice. Yeah. I guess what wants to be shared is like part of my own growth, a big part of my own growth in both of those areas was learning, or I guess first it was just seeing that I really didn't know what I like, one, what I wanted and didn't want. Like I didn't really know how to have boundaries. That's just not really like a concept that I grew up with in my family. It was just sort of like, my worth was, well, I don't want to speak unskillfully. So I needed to learn basically what my boundaries were. And I needed to learn like, I like this feels good. I don't like that. Maybe I'll try that and see. But so a lot of the spiritual practice was knowing myself first. And knowing myself, I mean, like could have been like exploring on my own and also exploring with partners, but like letting the partner know like I'm really not sure, or like finding myself sometimes in a nonverbal place where it like felt scary to say yes or no to a thing, even if the situation wasn't dangerous. I remember that would happen a lot, and go like, what is that? Sort of getting curious about that, and seeing that as a door through which to try to learn about like the roots of that and the seeds of that, which I think were planted in childhood and also by my socialization as a woman, and in watching pornography as a young child and teenager, and just sort of like learning a lot of things that I needed to unlearn later. So yeah, so first was learning about myself, my preferences, and then second was learning how to communicate those, like literally open my mouth and say something, ideally in the moment, which is, I don't know how many people have done that. It's very hard if you've never done it to just say like, hey, can we stop? That it takes a lot of courage if you've never done it, and especially if you've done it and a person hasn't listened. And so like just learning, one, to be able to see the person I'm actually with and see the signs of safety with that person, and even reviewing them to myself, like, do I know this person is safe? Have they shown me any reason why they wouldn't want to take a pause right now? And sort of like reviewing that to like embolden myself to open my mouth. And then with practice, and then also, I kind of created a practice with one partner where because they knew that I had a hard time saying things in the moment, we created a practice where I would say, oh, hey, could you do that like this differently? And they would say, thank you so much for telling me. I'd love to do that differently. I want you to feel good. And just something about that, like, would land so deeply in the moment. And we would just do that over and over and over again. And I would do that for them. And there's something so healing about like learning to use my voice in a sexual space, that's not taboo, that's actually really helps my partner love me better. And hearing another person's voice helps me love them better and meet them. So yeah, that's what I've got.
Lynn bowing in. Just so appreciating what's been shared. Thinking for myself about approaching communication about sex through both verbal and nonverbal ways. The ways that my own or a lover's breath communicates a lot, eye contact or face turned away. If there's tears coming up, there's so much of that by being present and aware for myself and for another person, I can pick up a lot more and I can discern when to pause, what's wanted and what's maybe not. I'm someone who's had a number of experiences of leaving my body during sexual intimacy um, because of trauma or because I've just had a lot of experiences where the message inside of me or from a partner was like, push through, like we're almost there, just hang in there. And that sucks. I hope that never happens again, and maybe it will. And so kind of leaving or dissociating. And so, yeah, the practice of like interrupting that and pausing, going slow or stopping things or taking time to like cuddle or be reassured has been really healing and powerful. And things like the mindfulness bell and my Plum Village app are helpful. It just goes off at certain times and it's like, 3 breaths. All right, here we go. And that those pauses can also be a really playful form of anticipation. And there's a lot of tools that I've come across and learned about in the last few years, things like the consent wheel or through relationship anarchy communities, there's a smorgasbord that looks like a map of all kinds of questions of like, oh, what are our agreements with each other about what feels good or what doesn't feel good? What are we interested in? And for that one in particular, I printed out a whole bunch of copies and gave it to friends, even friends where we're in just clearly platonic relationships about like, wow, how do you feel about sharing money? How do you feel about sleeping in the same bed as friends? How do you feel about, touch like on the back of your shoulder or on your knee? And having those conversations has been a really cool way to get to know people that I'm close with. Especially if they're approached with like playfulness and curiosity of like, oh, I want to learn you or understand you better. And I want you to understand me better. And we don't often talk about these things. And I would like to know. That's been really beautiful. It also often helps for me personally to talk about these things in the moment for sure when necessary, but to really have bigger conversations when I'm out walking with someone or doing an activity that feels low stakes, like washing and drying dishes. Those are times when I'm like side by side with someone where that for me makes it easier to bring up hard things. The practice of Dharma sharing or deep listening and loving speech has also been really helpful because now I can feel those cues in my body of like, oh, my stomach is tightening, or I feel this sort of nervous energy going up the center of my body. Like I need to lean in and say a thing or ask a question. So those have been really valuable. Yeah, thank you. Oh, one more. I also have a notebook that's titled Messies and Questions. And I write a lot of stuff where I'm like working it out, processing it, or not sure that it's ready to have a conversation yet, that it might not be skillful yet until I understand more of my own landscape. And I use that when I need to make repair, when there's been a rupture, or when I want to ask for something that feels vulnerable. I'm also thinking about the last partner I had. I think organically, we kind of did a beginning anew, like a check-in at the end of um our kind of intimacy time of like, wow, this was so great. I wasn't sure about this. How was this for you? Is there something you'd like me to know for next time? Next time, would you be willing to offer this for me? And yeah, I think that could be a really cool thing. It just occurred to me, like, what would it be like to intentionally nurture a version of beginning anew with a partner around physical intimacy? Yeah, thanks.
Can I add one little thing? Just a little thing. Such a cool tool I forgot to mention. We because I used to do therapy with people in alternative lifestyles, one tool that we used a lot, or that I shared with people and also have used personally and found so useful, is a yes, no, maybe list. And this can be used for people in all kinds of relationships, but basically it's just a big old long list of all kinds of things that people could be interested in sexually. And it's I found it so useful, especially when starting a new relationship with somebody, to just like, even if I've done the list before, to like, I go through it, they go through it, and then we come together and we look and we're like, where do we overlap? What things are you excited about and what things are you not, and what things might be experimentation space? So that's a tool that I really love and would be happy to share if anybody's interested.
This is Matt Barian. Yeah, I would like to add some practice that me and Adam do often too. Is that like Linz was sharing about, checking in. So we tend to do that at least once a week, to just have a space for us to just sit and do a deep listening, and then mindful speech with the two of us, to share what is alive in us, and perhaps something that happened, that kind of make us feel unheard or misunderstood. So there's a time that we make for us to just sit and hold space with one another. It's kind of like a Dharma sharing session, but just the two of us, to kind of you know share without having another person being interrupted. Just kind of like share our hearts out. And also we call it a love meditation, where we have a flow of different thing that we do to just sit for a minute of facing each other, to look each other in the eyes, a hugging meditation. And we have the bell that kind of tell us 2 minutes of hugging, and then move on to facing each other. So we have that kind of tools to just help us to reconnect. And I think it's very helpful, because as for me, as a very very extreme introvert person, I have a hard time expressing my thought and my feeling, and also connecting. So we kind of find tools that can help us to kind of come out of the shell, sometime, and reconnect. And also, Adam kind of add this on, when we have something that something that disrupt in our interaction. We will come and have a talk, the NVC session. Then afterwards, there have to be a moment that we need to be in contact, touching, so that we can feel, the energy of each other without having to speak. Just having our hands touching, or there's a moment that we just rub each other, so that we feel like we are here and you are there, something like that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, friends. So the chat is now open. If you have questions that you would like to share, we can perhaps address one or two and speak to those, and we could also collect them if there's a future conversation that would be valuable. So welcome your questions in the chat in the next like 10 minutes or so. So maybe time for one more question.
I can speak a little bit to this. Thanks, Daniela, for your question. No problem about joining late.
Could you read
You have a, huh?
could you read the question, Dana?
Oh, sure. Oh, I thought everybody could see it. So the question is, any advice for long distance relationship? Heart emoji. Um, hmm. Yeah, that is a really tough one. I've kind of come to a place for myself where they're not for me anymore, but I have been in a few while I've been with the practice. Um, and I think what was beneficial for me was having like regular times where we can communicate, whether it's like weekly or whatever rhythm feels good with me and that person, but like regular quality time that can be like I can expect and know that that person will make space for me and I will make space for them in that time. Um, and then also having really uh maybe like clear expectations about like what the shape of the relationship is and like what my hopes, my hopes for communication, my hopes for boundaries, their hopes for communication and boundaries, and making sure that we're really on the same page about that. Um, yeah, I think most of the ouchies came from not being on the same page about expectations because it's so difficult to miss things, miss cues, and not speak things when there's not a ton of fabric of our relation, like of time together where you live with a person. There's a lot of space for communicating verbally and non-verbally, but when you're not together, there has to be a lot more intentionality about, uh, at least for me, I would notice that I'd come up with all these things where I would get hurt or resentment would build, and it was really because I just didn't know what I wanted and I wasn't able to communicate that. So I think that those would be my biggest things. Uh, yeah.
This is Tofu Banyan. I was gonna tackle the next question, which is, could anyone speak to practicing with body shame that arises in sexual intimacy? I have, that is still a practice for me in terms of being naked with another person, or just as I've gotten older, I've gained weight. And I know for me at the end of the day, I can't hand that to somebody else to tell me that I look good or I'm okay. So I know for me, it has to be a practice. It's something I practice with, is I am beautiful, which is to say I am beautiful in the here and now, while still simultaneously working with how I'm still perceiving myself, what the mirror is telling me versus what I'm the messaging for myself. So my practice is to coming back to trying to work on changing that narrative and not handing it to somebody else to change it for me. I feel that at the end of the day, that's me. I have to put that on me to take care of. But yeah, that's what I got on that tofu banger.
This is Matt Bowing. So with the long distance relationships advice, I do not have any advice because I can see that would be hard for me, because even with my husband, not seeing him for a week or a couple of days would be very hard. So I really love what Dana offer is that, where do you see and yourself in the relationship and the other person, and also, make the make that agreement with each other. So I don't want to speak beyond that, because it's hard. It's hard. Yeah, with the body shame thing, as we know in queer community, especially gay men community, it's about the body image. We're supposed to look a certain way to be hot, right? And it's so conditioned in our community to really, to really see ourselves to see ourselves as lovable. We have to, we have to look a certain way, basically. So when that thinking comes into the bedroom, there's a lot of, baggage coming in. So for me, I have to relearn that, again. This practice is helping me to accept, and I'm still practicing it, to accept the way I am in this present moment. The practice of impermanence also helping me a lot, and also the impermanent lens that I see in my partner, that he will change, is also helping me. Reciting the 5 remembrances also helping me a lot. And the teaching of, in 100 years from now, where would my partner be? Where would myself be? It helps me to really nourish this moment. And when that practice is so ingrained in your consciousness, our shames and our body, our image kind of disappear, in the moment, in the intimate moment, and focusing on the bonding aspect of it instead of the physical realm of it. That's why we are talking about sacred sexuality, right? Because instead of going up here, in the head, we come down to the to our present, to being in the present, the bonding, the connection of the energies, instead of connecting with the physical body. Maybe we can change the lens of that, of seeing it as just a sexual act. It's the exchanging of the energies, instead of the body rubbing against each other, right? And that's how I see sacred sexuality. It's about the energy bonding, and then that will make that the conditioned thinking of body shame and how we looks like in the moment, it would not be present. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Your friends, this is so rich, and I hope that this conversation gets to continue and to be an evolving one. And I want to invite us to sit for a few minutes as we close our time, and just like Dharma Rain, let all of these experiences shared kind of find their space or wash away if they're not beneficial. So I'll invite a sound of the bell and let us sit for a few minutes in silence. Also honoring what hasn't been shared, what hasn't yet been spoken to, or the things we may not even have words for. And then we'll close with some announcements. So I'll invite a sound of the bell and invite us to come back to our bodies and our breathing. Offering a deep bow to my friends in this conversation. Thank you, Matt and Dana and Tofu. I'm going to pause the recording.